Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 187, season 4, episode 27. The portion of the week is known as Tazria. We are, I think, in the window of the holiday of Passover, as it is just a little over a week away. And so the mind and the heart and the soul and the spirit and all the actions very much revolve around preparing for the holiday of Passover. Let's dive right in this week to the win of the week. The win of the week actually took place last weekend. I spent the weekend last Shabbat in Jerusalem with my wife at a really lovely bar mitzvah that took place there. And just being there on a weekend, really being any time in Jerusalem, spending time there is worthwhile. But it was sort of interesting from a win perspective for a few reasons that were super interesting. It made it an experience. One is obviously getting the chance to celebrate anytime, anywhere with friends is really good. And longtime friends is even better. And from the standpoint of the interplay, it's a family of friends who live overseas, and they came to celebrate here, and they brought people with them. And it was sort of interesting to sort of see the interplay between those who live here and those who live there, and how that's manifesting and showing itself over the course of the last weeks and months. The other thing that was super interesting, which I'd never experienced before, was what I would call a Ramadan traffic jam last Friday night, because we're in Jerusalem. We were actually near the old city of Jerusalem, and as it was the last Friday of Ramadan, massive amount of people were streaming towards the old city, towards the Temple Mount, towards the Dome, towards the mosque, and I'd never seen that before. The traffic jam that ensued on the streets of Jerusalem reminded me of Jewish holidays. Here was the Muslim holiday. It was astounding to watch just the thousands of people streaming, walking with their families, carrying their blankets and their food and whatever it is that they were going to do there to break the fast. It was something to experience. And then where we were praying was on a rooftop. So we're on a rooftop overlooking the old city, watching this ensue. It was fascinating to see. That's the win of the week. It was really a great experience. It was a really great bar mitzvah. I'm glad I had the chance to celebrate with our friends in Jerusalem. The learning of the week for me this week is related to some of my work, in the sense that when you come in as a consultant, this is something that I'm appreciating more. When you're coming in as an outsider, as a coach, a consultant, you come in with maybe some expertise, and you come in with a reputation, perhaps, and obviously you're coming in as a hired gun to do a very specific task. And one of the things that you have to do, and what I have to do better, is appreciate all the cultures and relationships and the feathers that potentially get ruffled when it is that you try to introduce even one slightly different, slightly new approach to the work that's being done. And so I sort of experienced that on a good level this week, appreciating, trying to get something done there on a project, and appreciating the feathers that effectively I ruffled. And I didn't intend to ruffle, but I did ruffle in that place, in that organization. And so that's a good learning for me, sort of be mindful of and pay attention to that reality and all the things that come with being in that role. Okay. Our topic of the week is the examined life. And it comes to us by way of the following. The portion of the week, for the most part, focuses on leprosy, the person who becomes a leper. Not the physical malady that maybe we've read about in books. Years ago, my wife and I were traveling in Greece, and off the coast of Crete is a leper colony, no longer in use, but it is now a tourist attraction. It's a weird thing to say, but it was super interesting to sort of travel by boat across the bay to this island to see this leper colony as it was, how the people lived, what it was like, and so on. But that's not the leprosy we're talking about. The leprosy we're talking about here is the leprosy in the biblical sort, and it creates impurity. As we've talked about in the past, and as many of you know, it is not a physical malady in the sense that it's not contagious. It doesn't spread. The only part that spreads potentially is the impurity of the person or the clothing item or the walls of the home that have leprosy on them. And so I was thinking about this issue a lot. Well, how do you teach leprosy? Like, what's the coaching or leadership piece here? You're not going to say, well, let's have a coaching session with a leper, although you probably could do that and get a lot out of that. But what are we going to pull from leprosy? And so what I thought to pull from leprosy is this quote from Socrates, which is this: "The unexamined life is not worth living." And we'll see exactly in a moment how those things connect. But let's talk for a moment about the unexamined life. The unexamined life is the person who floats through life day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, over the course of many, many years, decades, in fact, and never for a second looks at what he or she has done or not done, accomplished, not accomplished, who they might have hurt, not hurt, who they might have helped and not helped, what opportunities they took, what opportunities they missed. It's an unexamined life. What's the point of that? The Socrates quote really forces us to look inward, to question and to examine what we think, what we believe, what we do, and in the case of leadership, how we lead and who we lead and the way in which we lead. It's effectively a deep self-examination where we go to uncover all of the biases and ambiguities and misshapen perceptions and decision-making habits that we have that, typically speaking, on a day-to-day basis, we go about unconsciously. So coaching spend a lot of time on examining life, not our own, obviously our own also, but the people that we're working with, the people that we're trying to help transform, expand, grow, develop, helping them examine where the blockages are, where the issues are, where the stumbling blocks are, what the goals are, what the why is, the what and the how, of course, of everything that goes on. And so the unexamined life, what's the value in that? The examined life, the life that grows, the life that expands, the life that improves, the life that helps others, the life that matures, that gets better day in, day out, the life worth living, the Socrates quote. What does that have to do with leprosy? One of the things that happens to the biblical leper is that they are required to live outside the camp for the period of time in which they are impure. It is a time of, we talked about this in the past, guilt and shame, but it's also a time of deep introspection. It's a time of deep learning. It's a type of deep self-assessment. It's a period of time where the person is meant to unpack all of their biases, all of their ambiguities, and get to clarity around their decision-making and actions based on their decision-making, getting to depth about what they believe and what they think. And so that is something that we should all ascribe to, taking time, spending time, thinking about ourselves, thinking about what we're doing, being mindful and present in the moment. The leper got to this space specifically because they weren't living that way. They might have been living in a way and in a manner in which they thought they were doing the right thing, or that they were trying to be righteous in the manner in which they were operating, because we know that leprosy, for the most part, according to our sages, came as a result of a person speaking negatively, speaking falsely about others. What's called in Hebrew lashon hara, bad speech. There are times when it is that a person might be saying these things to other people and believe that it's righteous. Maybe it's a righteous indignation about the way someone is behaving. And so they badmouth or besmirch or talk down about somebody in their presence, not in their presence. And they live in that space. And it breeds cruelty, it breeds anger, it breeds a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion. It breeds a certain person you just don't want to be. But you're not looking at yourself in that way to try to get any better. What's also interesting about the leper is that the leper cannot determine the impurity of their actions or the impurity of the leprosy on their own. There's a great quote from the Mishnah, Mishnaic text in the tractate called Negaim, which is about blemishes, which basically makes the statement like this. A person sees all of the blemishes other than their own. For better or for worse, we sometimes simply just don't see the things that we're doing wrong. We're just not paying attention. We're not aware. We're not thoughtful. We're not mindful, like we said before. And we cannot see our own blemishes. Or we may just sort of shake them off as if they're nothing, and we don't pay mind to them whatsoever. But we'll clearly see, oh, he's got this, and she's got that, and they got this, and well, you got leprosy, man. I see it on you. You got it. We can easily see other people's blemishes, insufficiencies, deficiencies. And so we have a self-awareness bias around us that we need to work on. We have other cognitive biases around us that we need to work on. And the way in which the leper works on this is by having someone else point out their impurity. That in the case is a priest. A holy spiritual person points out the impurity, sends them out of the camp. So it requires another person to let them know of their impurity. And it requires them, the leper, to be outside the camp for the period of their impurity, or for as long as the leprosy lasts. One other interesting detail. Leprosy basically is sort of like a dead skin. So the skin itself maybe turns white, and the hair that's inside the blemish turns white, and effectively looks like a dead patch on your arm, on your leg, or wherever it may be. That's how you see it. And if it grows, it's obviously continuing to expand. Obviously, you're not getting better, you're only getting worse, and you're deeper in it. What's interesting is that if fresh or live skin, quote unquote, starts to grow within the center of that blemish, that doesn't make you pure, it only makes you even more impure. Let's talk about why all these things are. You see, when the cases of the examined life is that a person is looking to get better, is looking to expose the biases that they have and expose the blind spots, which we talked about 2 years ago maybe, the concept of blind spots, so that they can improve and get better and appreciate the things that are holding them back. This is what the examined life is about. Looking at, right, sort of holding in their hand, flipping through, piercing through, examining the pages of your personal book to see where the biases are. And so when we're looking to self-discovery and improvement, by going into these spaces, this is how we start to overcome them. Okay, good. So cognitive biases are basically what you might call systemic and systematic errors in our thinking that affect how we make decisions. There are all kinds of cognitive biases. You have overconfidence bias. If you're a CEO and you believe your company is ready when all the data and all the people and everything else is telling you that you're not ready, that overconfidence is a bias because maybe you have some other success somewhere else, a dangerous cognitive bias. It's happening in your mind, but it's a bias. You might have what's the opposite, is some sort of, maybe not exactly the opposite, an anchoring bias, where something that you did once before is holding you into that space. It's anchoring the way in which you operate now. And so you're comparing everything to that anchor. So it could be financial in the sense that maybe your business has to set much higher goals, but you're anchored at a very low level. The third one is the halo effect bias, where you look at somebody who was effective in one role, and because they were super effective there, they have the halo around their head, and now they can do pretty much anything, which is simply not true. It's super dangerous, right? Massively dangerous to have these biases. And the dangers there are real, because if you're in a space as a leader with clouded judgment, it leads to poor decision making, and it impacts everyone. It creates an environment of miscommunication, a misunderstanding, as you know, of course, destroying the trust and corroding any sort of cohesiveness of team. Who wants to be part of that? And so the person who is now plucked out of society, who is operating in that way, in all those ways, maybe even worse, promoting themselves, pushing themselves, stepping on other people, right? Cutthroat approach to everything. Thinks they're doing that for the betterment. They're saying, oh, I'm going to be cutthroat because I have to make the living, because I have to support my family, because I have to be X and Y and Z. And so they'll throw people to the side because they have to get to a certain place. They have to behave a certain way. It becomes their life. So the corrosive nature is the frame, right? And the manner in which they're operating, the lifeblood that they're feeding it is coming through the middle of it, but it's operating in that frame. It's the same thing as the living, breathing skin inside the blemish that's on your skin. This is an idea that's brought out by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz in his weekly talks from years ago on the weekly portion. And he makes this sort of analogy here. You're living inside the negativity. You become that negativity. It envelops you. It takes you over. Super dangerous. You can't get out of it because you can't see where the boundaries are. You can't see how you're going to improve and how you're going to be better. These are biases. They're serious. They're real. One last one, which I think is super important, is the bias of what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is basically this. It's basically a paradox in which the person with the least amount of ability in a specific space thinks that they are the most competent, and the person who's the most competent with the true expertise tends to underestimate their powers and their prowess and their success. And so you have someone who is, let's say, 20% aware, who thinks they're doing 80% of the work, and someone who's actually doing 80% of the work who doesn't really get a lot of the credit, but also believes that they only deserve 10% of the credit. It's a flip. It's super dangerous. So you have people who are confident when they shouldn't be, and people who aren't confident when they should be. And when this happens in your team, there's inherent danger that comes with the Dunning-Kruger effect. I see the Dunning-Kruger effect quote all over the place on LinkedIn and Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, in all kinds of articles. And I think here it's super powerful because let's say you're a new leader, you stepped into a new role, you could get ahead of yourself, start thinking great things about yourself, all macho and powerful because you're the new leader, when in fact you're the negative side of this. Appreciate that you don't have all the expertise, all the knowledge. It's coming in a little bit humble is super valuable. The reverse is also because you have people who are genuinely experts, genuinely talented, high level, who are not just humble, but sort of forced into a space of humility and a lack of confidence in their abilities because they simply don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so you get it both ways. You get it for yourself, and as you project it towards other people on your team, this is an incredibly dangerous bias that comes up because you're living an unexamined life, because you're not taking the time. And so what's super important here then is this. The two lessons on the flip side, the part of this, what gets you started in the examined life is number one, having someone or someone's, a team of people who you trust to point out your weaknesses, your biases, your flaws, your imperfections. They play the role of the priest in the story of the leper. Without those people, you'll never get there. It's dangerous. And it's understandable why, from a psychological standpoint, people don't want to sit inside their weaknesses and their corrosive behaviors. Total sense. We want to think the best about ourselves. We want to think positively about ourselves. But we need to be honest, we need to be realistic, and we need to be human, which is the idea then that we're not perfect and that we do make mistakes and that we can always improve, we can always get better. So number one is to have this group of people, at least one other person, who's going to tell you what they need to tell you, and you're comfortable asking them and comfortable hearing it from them. That's really important. In that is a whole host of what we've talked about over time with the soft skills. Is your ability to be vulnerable and accepting of feedback. You're willing to be reflective of everything else that they're telling you, and obviously willing to take action. But part two of this is giving yourself the time and the space, like the leper in the leper colony or the leper in the Bible who is outside of the camp for the period of their impurity, the time to reflect, the time to introspect, the time to examine the self, the time to become aware, to review actions, behaviors, language, affect, approach, personality as it relates to the people in your life, your immediate family, the most important relationships around you, spouse, children, friends, community, the work side, the team that you lead, the company that you lead. You imagine if you came back from a moment like this, you were open and honest with the team, you told them, I need to work on some things for myself. I'm taking a week off, week of solitude away. I know what I need to work on. You spend the time doing the inner work, examining the life, coming back refreshed, open, with a different kind of mindset, maybe a growth mindset that really allows you the opportunity, the possibility that you can improve, that you can remove these obstacles, that you become better as a leader, as a person, as a human. And then, therefore, by modeling that behavior, giving your team the opportunity to do the same. Breeding the trust, breeding the sense of confidence and comfort and openness that you're looking to get in your team. This is like amazing stuff. And so those two lessons coming from the Bible leper of having the team to be able to point it out and taking the time to then do the work is the beginnings of a plan towards getting better. And that's the power of pulling from something that effectively is esoteric and difficult to attach and wrap our minds around, but is actually very powerful and very beautiful and very much there in the story of the biblical leper. And to end with a quote like we always do, here's a quote from Aristotle, since we're going back in time. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. That is Coaching with the Bible, Coaching the Bible for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week as we move even closer to the holiday of Passover. Take care.